whatever. A little bit more. And look at me go, I need the next book now. Turned out to be not necessary. Ugh, no. Blah, blah, blah. Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel. My name is Femke from Femke Fiction on Instagram and Bookish Buddies on Twitter. And today I am here with my March wrap-up. Now, March has been a pretty strange month. I'm assuming everyone knows about the COVID-19 situation, and halfway through the month our country basically went into what they call intelligent lockdown. Whatever. And another strange thing this month is that I actually read all the books that I put on my TBR. So without further ado, let's get into those books. The first book I read this month was The Shadows Between Us by Tricia Levenseller. I gave this book 5 stars. I absolutely enjoyed it. I loved Alessandra, I loved how cunning she was, I loved Callias, I also loved how cunning he was. I did struggle a little bit with like the first half of the book because I just felt it was a bit slow. But the second half more than made up for that. I was really impressed by this story. I really liked the plot, even though it was kind of predictable. I just didn't even care because I just loved reading this so much. The second book I read this month was The Fire Queen by Emily R. King. This is actually the book Esmay challenged me to read for February, but I was late and I didn't read it, but I read it now. I gave this book 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I loved the world and I loved the plot. I really loved how much action there was, but overall I would have just liked a little bit more for me to give it that 5 stars. I really did fly through this, but I think for me mostly it was the characters that I didn't really like them is too strong, but the characters are for me the biggest part of this book that made me not give it 5 stars. It's a pretty small book, so I think that's the biggest reason why everything can't be developed as well as in a longer book. Nonetheless, I really enjoyed this and I'm really excited for the third book. The next book I read was The Deathless Girls by Kieran Millwood Hargrave. I gave this book 3 stars, but that is mostly because my expectations were wrong, I think. I have to admit, when I got this, it was mostly because of the cover. I really, really love the cover. I saw people describe it as essentially Dracula's Wives, but lesbian. While there is a female-female romance in this book, and while eventually, in the end, they are Dracula's wives, that's a stretch. Most of this book is not about that. Most of this book is about the journey of the main characters to becoming Dracula's wives, even though that is not the goal. That is basically a consequence of what they do. I really enjoyed the fact that the main characters were part of a traveler community. I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the setting. It was set in Romania and Esmay and I visited that last year. So yeah, like I said, I think most of the reasons I rated this 3 stars was the fact that my expectations were not what they should have been. Then the next book that I read was Spin the Dawn by Elizabeth Lim. Spin the Dawn was the book that Esmay challenged me to read for March. And look at me go, I read both of the challenged book for this month. I gave this book 5 stars. I really can't, say anything else about this except for the fact that I loved it. I was a bit hesitant going into this because it was advertised as Project Runway meets Mulan. I really love Mulan. Project Runway, not so much. But I have to admit that is only a really small part of the book. This book was full of my favorite tropes. I really enjoyed the characters. I enjoyed the world building. I enjoyed the mythology. And I am really excited to see what the next book is going to bring, because this book, by the end, I was just in tears. I was sobbing. I need the next book now. Preferably like last month, but... Then the next book I read was Evermore by Sarah Holland, which is the second book in the Everless duology. I gave Evermore 4 stars. I have to admit, I don't think plot was this book's strongest point. But what I really enjoyed about this book was the mythology and just all the pieces of the puzzle falling into the right places. I just thought it was very well done, where the first book was really focused on, you know, using time as a currency, using your life's time as a currency. This book really focused more about how that system came into being and why, and all those kinds of things. And I personally really enjoyed that. That is, I think, the thing I was missing the most in the first book. So I was really happy that we got everything like that in this second and final book. Overall, especially because of the fact that these books are pretty short, this series has really impressed me with how much it gets done in so few pages. And overall, I think this was a very good duology, and Evermore was a very good conclusion to the duology. The next book that I read was War of the Bastards by Andrew Schwartz. This was the final book in the Royal Bastards trilogy, and I gave this book 5 stars. War of the Bastards takes place about a year after the events of the second book. This book is, in that sense, pretty brutal. It describes war, but what I personally enjoyed the most about this book is, again, essentially the history and how it came into being. So essentially what Evermore did as well. We have magic, and the magic exists because people are born close to a specific crystal. We don't know exactly where that came from. We know it belonged to the Titans, but we don't exactly know what the Titans are. And I really loved how much more deeply you go into the Titans lore in these books, and how, well, also how everything is wrapped up. Again, I was sobbing by the end. Turned out to be not necessary, but overall this was a very good conclusion to this trilogy. And honestly, this was everything I wanted out of this book. So I'm a very happy camper. Then up next we have Woven in Moonlight by Isabel Ibanez. I gave this book 4 stars, but that is mostly because of the fact that while I was reading it, I was thinking this was going to be at least a duology, that there were going to be sequels. When I finished this, however, I found out that there was the possibility for spin-offs, but that essentially it was a standalone. I think there were definitely a couple of things, for example, how exactly the magic system worked were not really explained well in this book. And while I do love the magic system and I love the plot and I love the characters, this and basically some world building issues I had caused me to not give this book 5 stars. Initially I did give it 5 stars because I thought, well, for a first book this is a pretty damn good book. But then if you consider that it is the only book, then there are definitely a few things missing. Like, I would have given it 5 stars if there was, you know, definitively going to be a sequel, which was going to expand on the world and what happened. But the fact that it didn't left me kind of disappointed, especially because I would have liked a bit more from this world. But again, overall, I really enjoyed this book, and I think that the fact that this has like Bolivian politics and Bolivian mythology is super interesting. I really did love the setting and, well, basically everything else. So this is a definite read if you are interested in that kind of thing. So those were all the books that were on my actual TBR, and then I read 2 more books in addition to that. And the first one is Eight Will Fall by Sarah Harrion. Now, I gave this book somewhere between 3 and 4 stars. It's not really a 3-star book for me, but it's also not really a 4-star book for me. This book really reinforced my hatred of caves. This book is mostly set in a cave or a mine, technically, and just, no. Blah, blah, blah. I do not like caves, even not, you know, reading about that. But, beside that point, the world was very well described. The atmosphere was very creepy, so that is very well done, but I do think there were too many main characters. There were 8 main characters, and honestly, I believe this book was supposed to be a duology, but was then, you know, rewritten to be a standalone. And unfortunately that shows, because I think too much is crammed into this one book, so we don't really get to know most of the characters, unfortunately. I did see most of the plot twists coming, but nonetheless, I really enjoyed the story. I thought it was pretty original. And like I said, the world building was really sufficiently creepy. And I'm pretty curious to see what Sarah Harrion will write next. Then the next book I read is an oldie, and that is I Am Number 4 by Pittacus Lore. This is one of those books that has been on my shelves forever, and I have just simply never read it. But I needed a book that started with the I for my alphabet challenge, and I decided, why not go with this? I think I would have enjoyed this book a lot more had I read it when it came out, so essentially 10 years ago. I liked this book. I was a bit annoyed with John for constantly mentioning that Sarah was beautiful and being the most beautiful girl in the world and yada yada yada. And there was really... she never did anything to deserve that, she just was. That kind of annoyed me. Honestly, I think the best part of this book was Bernie Kosar, who was John's dog. Overall, I really like the idea of this book. I pretty much like the world. But overall, this book suffered from some pacing issues, and now this definitely was an easy to read book. It was full of action, so that is pretty redeeming for me. I gave this book 3 stars. I don't know if I mentioned that. I will probably continue this series, probably not right away, but I mean, I enjoyed this enough to want to see where it goes. Okay, so those were all of the books that I read in March. Please let me know down in the comments below which books you read, and if you read any of the books I read this month. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to our channel and clicking the bell icon so you'll be notified every single time that Esmay or I post. I want to thank you for watching, and I will see you the next time. Bye!